just like Thursday, the boat in trouble. This time, Nomura was able to wriggle off the hook with 1:30 to go, and now they hold a favored position.
Not going to have it. Stay close to each other.
Game here is to get up to full speed. Kayard makes his move first, and he'll be going faster when the gun goes off.
Go down below the line. 20. 17. 14. 13. 4, 3, 2, 1, gun!
Another clean start and another good job by Dellenbaugh.
I never get tired of watching that. It's all kinds of fun. It's, yeah. Anywho, welcome. I'm gonna try to talk about a bit of a serious subject. Also needed to get rid of that echo in my head. Somewhat, anyway, a little bit of history, anyway. I want to talk about the doctrine of discovery, which I'm not sure how many people are aware of what that is. Let me tell you a little bit briefly. Well, let's let Wikipedia tell you a little bit about what the doctrine of discovery is. The doctrine of discovery doctrine, as they put it, is a disputed interpretation of international law during the Age of Discovery. Commonly, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, all that. Introduced into United States municipal law by U.S. Supreme Court Justice John Marshall in Johnson v. McIntosh, 1823. In Marshall's formulation of the doctrine, discovery of territory previously unknown to Europeans gave the discovering nation title to that territory against all other European nations. And this title could be perfected by possession. A number of legal scholars have criticized Marshall's interpretations of the relevant international law. In recent decades, advocates for indigenous rights have campaigned against the doctrine. I wonder why. It may be because they're from India, or, any number of places in the colonial world. In 2023, the Vatican formally repudiated the doctrine. You might ask, when did the Vatican formally introduce the doctrine? Well, that little doggerel I just recited, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He did. In 1492, he sailed the ocean blue, landed in the Caribbean, saw a bunch of the Taino people on the islands in the Caribbean, thought, well, these folks would make lovely slaves. And, new land for the King and Queen of Spain. Promptly sails back, claims the land and the people therein for the King of Spain and the Queen of Spain. Sails back to Spain and does a couple of things. First of all, he tells the King and Queen of Spain, hey, I found new territory for y'all and I declared it yours by discovery. The King and Queen of Spain said, hey, that's cool. but Columbus, being a man of Genoa, a man of great ambition for mercantile wealth for himself, also decided, well, who can really sort of put the seal on this whole thing? Well, I know who that'd be. That'd be the Pope. Yeah, the Pope. The Pope at the time was Pope Alexander VI. Pope Alexander VI was, as luck would have it, a Spaniard. So Columbus wrote a little letter to the Pope and said, "Hey, Pope, what do you think? Can you get behind your pals and mine, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella at this point in time?" And Pope answered with a papal bull, speaking from the pulpit ex cathedra, speaking as the vicar of Jesus on earth, and says, "Fuck yeah, of course I can." What does he say? Well, let's see. He says, the papal bull, inter caetera, which has entered into the English language in a modification as etc. In other words, among other things, is what it means. Issued a papal bull on 4th of May, 1493. Stated that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered. Note, any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and declared that the Catholic faith, now mind you, the Catholic faith is the Catholic faith proclaimed by the Bishop of Rome, and at the time, the Bishop of Rome had no rivals. Aside from the Bishop of Constantinople and the Eastern Orthodox, but that was after the schism and all of that stuff. But there were no Protestant churches at the time. Martin Luther hadn't nailed his theses to the door. Okay. Discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and declared that the Catholic faith and the Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. This doctrine of discovery became the basis of all European claims in the Americas, as well as the foundation for the United States Western expansion. In the U.S. Supreme Court, in the 1823 case Johnson v. McIntosh, Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion, in the unanimous decision of all the rich white landowning guys that were sitting on the Supreme Court at that time, because those were the only people who could actually sit on the Supreme Court at that point in time, because nobody else could. That the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to New World lands. In essence, American Indians had only a right of occupancy, which could be abolished. The bull inter caetera, etc., made headlines again throughout the 1990s and in 2000, when many Catholics petitioned Pope John Paul II to formally revoke it, and recognize the human rights of indigenous non-Christian peoples. Let's be clear. Pope Alexander VI explicitly, in that papal bull, refused to recognize the human rights of non-Christian peoples. Anyway, this gave me I've been thinking about this for a while, and I came across this weekend in my languor and post-turkey stupor, came across a talk by this fellow Robert Jones, who has actually written a book on the topic. Well, let's just let me just pop that stuff up here, because this talk was remarkable to me, absolutely remarkable to me. Let's see, where did I put that thing? I always lose track of where I've got stuff going here. All right, right here, found it. All right, share this tab. Share this tab instead. Yeah, there you go. I just want to play you some stuff on here, and you should listen to this. Is one talk. I found another. I'll make some reference to that a little bit later, but listen to this guy. This guy's. I was scared. I got to tell you something. This guy was born in Jackson, Mississippi. Got his undergrad degree was in computer science. Went off to the Southern Baptist Bible College. Got a degree there. Got a and got his master's, I think, from the Southern Christian Bible College, and then got a doctorate in theology from Emory University. Now, Emory University, you all may recognize as an historically Black college, which gave me some hope that maybe this guy wasn't a total with the title of his book, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy. I was a little bit scared of what I was going to hear from a guy who got a degree from the Southern Baptist Bible College and was born in Jackson, Mississippi. But this dude is, dare I say, woke.
Well, thank you. I am so pleased to be here in Jackson. I grew up here. He gave you the educational credentials, but I grew up here. I was born in Atlanta, but as we sometimes say about Yankees, I got to Jackson as fast as I could, and went to Forest Hill High School in Southwest Jackson before going to.
See right there, the whole thing about Yankees, that sets my teeth on edge every single time, because I got to tell you, I'm about as Yankee gets. Yeah, I'm proud of it. I'm like stupidly proud of it. It's crazy that I'm crazy that way. But you know what? We all have the ability to be proud of our heritage, while simultaneously recognizing the really horrendous shit that my ancestors were engaged with. Anyway, I'll shut up, and you guys should just. I'll shut up for a bit. Listen to this guy. I won't chop this up.
Mississippi College in Clinton. So I'm thrilled to be here and to address folks in my home state. And I'm going to do a little bit of a reading and then just talk about the book a bit. But I do want to open with actually the opening of the book. It's a little story that I think helps capture some of the things I'm trying to do in this book. It's not a Mississippi story. It's actually a Minnesota story, but it is connected to the Mississippi River, as you will see, which actually forms a bit of a kind of metaphorical and literal backbone to the book, as I'm kind of traversing several states in the book. So I'll start with this story. On May 4th, 1863, the steamboat Northerner pushed up the Mississippi River from St. Louis, bound for Fort Snelling, a military outpost upriver from St. Paul, Minnesota. Just a few miles into the journey, Captain Alfred J. Woods encountered a large handmade raft adrift in the strong currents. Aboard were 76 African Americans, 40 men, 10 women, and 26 children. The leader of this determined group was Robert Hickman, who was attempting to free himself, along with his family and neighbors, from enslavement on a plantation in Boone County, Missouri. Hickman, a preacher who could both read and write, had seen newspaper accounts of President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation 4 months earlier. Although the proclamation did not apply to Missouri because it was under Union control, this news nonetheless inspired him to begin plans to escape north. The Hickman party aimed to reach free soil by way of the river, which was by then safely patrolled by the Union Army. They embarked under cover of darkness on a moonless night of May 3rd. But because their makeshift craft was not equipped with sails or oars, they drifted for a day in the wrong direction before encountering.
Now, yeah, there's this thing. The mighty Mississippi has a pretty strong southerly flow to its current. So unless you've got means of propulsion, you're going to wind up in Louisiana by the time you're done. But anyway, yeah.
Encountering the Northerner. Seeing the floundering party with so many children aboard, Captain Woods asked if they needed assistance. Sympathetic to their plight and knowing that the strains of the Civil War had left Minnesota with a labor shortage, Woods ordered the raft to be securely tied to the steamboat and offered to take them as far as his final destination. Neither Woods nor Hickman anticipated the vitriol that awaited them. On May 5th, the Northerner approached the levee in Lowertown on the outskirts of St. Paul. As local dock workers, mostly Irish, caught sight of the self-emancipated African Americans, commonly referred to as contraband by whites, on the trailing raft, they became increasingly agitated, seeing them as competition for jobs. As word spread, a threatening crowd gathered on the levee. The commotion was so great that St. Paul police arrived on the scene, but after assessing the situation, they sided with the mob and threatened to address not the Irish rabble-rousers, but the black asylum seekers, should they disembark. Captain Woods ordered the boat with his trailing raft to steam on to Fort Snelling. There, Hickman and his party came ashore without incident on May 5th. But they were met with an unexpected sight. Hundreds of disheveled Native Americans were huddled together, forcibly assembled near the docks. The desperate and anxious crowd they encountered were part of an original group numbering more than 1,600, mostly women, children, and elderly Dakota people, who had been held under guard all winter, following the Dakota War the year before, in a miserable encampment in a lowland area below Fort Snelling. Unbeknownst to them, Minnesota government officials and military leaders were awaiting the spring thaw that would allow for their mass deportation downriver from their ancestral homelands to a bleak reservation in the Nebraska Territory. By the time the ice finally melted, the river levels rose, hundreds had died. A group of 770 Dakota people had been shipped off the day before on another steamer, the Davenport. Having set the Hickman party safely ashore and unloaded the wagons and supplies for the military fort, Captain Woods ordered preparations to receive his next cargo. 547 Dakota people, whom he was transporting for the fee of $25 a head plus 10 cents a day for sustenance. Soldiers from Fort Snelling herded the ragtag remnant aboard the Northerner like so many cattle, as one observer put it. As they pulled away, a local minister's wife remarked, "May God have mercy on them, for they can expect none from man."
And then these are the good Christian people of St. Paul. So this guy tows a bunch of black people escaping from slavery in the South up the Mississippi River to unload them on a pier where hostile white people are afraid that they're going to take all their jobs. And his return, I hate to say it, cargo are a number of Native Americans who are being kicked off their land. When people say to me, when people, without any sort of, seemingly, without any sort of awareness, say, "Is this America?" When they look at examples of racism and ill treatment of minorities, I wryly grin at that, because yes, it is. It doesn't have to be, but it has been for a long time. Those of us who have spent a good deal of time in our lives to make sure that it isn't, that the better angels of our nature, as Lincoln put it, have an opportunity to spread their wings and spread justice. We've done that with the awareness that we have to fight for it. But this has been America. It is within my memory the kind of America that probably this man just escaped growing up in. And later in this talk, you'll hear about this man is the son, the child of generations of preachers and deacons in the church, as was I in his church. His grandfather was a deacon whose job it was on Sunday to make sure that no black people came into the congregation. So is this America? It is. It doesn't need to be, but it will be if we hew to certain traditions. And this is why this talk is just so wonderful, and this book is quite wonderful. You go back again. I said I wasn't going to jump in, but
Neither Hickman nor his companions, nor the Dakota people, would have had the perspective to realize they were witnessing the momentous final chapter of both chattel slavery in the U.S. and Indian removal in Minnesota. They would not have grasped the paradox the two groups represented that afternoon on the banks of the Mississippi River, that the end of bondage for Hickman's band also marked the last vestige of sovereignty for the Dakota people. And they certainly would have been unaware that in the closing weeks of 1862, just 5 months earlier, President Lincoln was simultaneously considering two documents that would dramatically change the fates of each group: a warrant for the mass execution of 38 Dakota men, and the Emancipation Proclamation. This encounter on May 5th, 1863 contains multiple narrative streams, each of which tells a different story about America. The question is, which do we follow? Do we tell the story of Fort Snelling, the military outpost established to protect the westward expansion of settler colonialism? Do we embark back down the Mississippi River to Missouri and the story of enslaved Africans in the South? Do we push upriver from St. Paul and its headwaters, upriver from St. Paul to its headwaters and the stories of indigenous peoples populating this land for millennia? Or do we portage east and cross the larger waters connected to the homelands of Europeans who first set foot on these shores just a few hundred years ago? Each narrative pushes back to a different beginning. So one of the things I'm trying to do in the book is to really think about this question that is roiling our country. That is, who are we as a country? And who is this country for? Right? And connected to that story are different origin stories, right? My son just came home from middle school where we live in DC, and has his 8th grade American history textbook with him. And it's one of the few textbooks they have these days. So I was pleased to see it come home as an actual textbook on the table. But on the cover of it is this image. And the image is this painting entitled The Spirit of 1776. Right? Some of you may have seen it, but it's basically these white dudes, one with a fife, one with a drum, right? They're marching, right? And they got a bandage head. They've been in a battle. And that's the image on the front of the textbook. And so if that's the image, right, of America, we have a certain kind of way we begin the story, right? With these European white men.
Yeah, and just so as you know, I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and the 19th of April is a big day in Lexington, Massachusetts, because the story of the Minutemen on that battle green, I was on that battle green more times than I can count. It's right in the middle of town. I drove past it going to friends' houses. The church, the first parish church at the very head of the green. The battle green's like this triangular section of land. The Concord Road is going off in one the Concord Road's going off in one direction, and another road further to the north out towards Burlington, Massachusetts, going in another direction. I grew up there. So that story was my story. And also, it also happens to be part of the fact that I have an ancestor who was there. So, yeah. But that's not the story, is it? It's not the story. It might be my origin story, but it's an origin story that has also curiously been adopted by the Irish immigrants in St. Paul who were pissed off at the black people and wanted to kick the natives off the land. And I don't understand. I don't understand why that. Anyway, let me just keep going.
Who are brave patriots, right, fighting in a war of independence. We've recently gotten in our society another origin story, a strong challenge, in fact, to that image, right? The 1619 Project over the last few years, and huge backlash, right, to that. No, it's not 1619, it's 1776. But what is the difference, and why did it matter so much to so many people? Right? Well, because if you have that image, that there's one beginning story. But what's the image? If you're going to put an image on the front of that, and if you remember the New York Times issue where the 1619 Project first broke, it's an image of an ocean with a ship, right? A single ship on it, and on that ship are people who are there against their will, African people there against their will, indentured servants destined to be enslaved people in colonial Virginia. So that's a different kind of beginning to our story. And if we begin there, we've got to account for that little image, and we've got to incorporate it somehow into the bigger narrative of the story. So one of the things I'm doing in the book is I'm wanting to say like a kind of yes and to that expansive view of American history. And the other image I think we sometimes have, I used to collect postage stamps as a kid, and there was that one that's ubiquitous everywhere of the other one with only white dudes in it, is that 1776 Philadelphia portrait where they're all there in their colonial finery with their quill pens, and they're all kind of around a table so you can see all of their faces. They're kind of, very unnaturally arranged around that table. But so if we kind of continue to open up the aperture, right? One of the things I suggest in the book is that we really have to keep opening it up, yes, to 1619, but we actually have to take a step further back because by 1619, the story of indigenous people in contact with European Americans is more than a century old already, right? So to get that into the frame, we've got to back up, and I'm arguing we have to back it up at least to 1493. Right, so yes, I know everybody's going to not the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as we all kind of learned this little rhyme right in elementary school, but actually 1493, because something quite significant happens in 1493, and that is that Columbus goes back, right, and says, hey, like he doesn't actually know where he is or where he was, but he's like, back, I found these kind of undiscovered lands and peoples, and he's going back, and what does he ask for? He asks for more supplies to return, right? So he wants more ships, more soldiers, more missionaries, and he wants a broader mandate. And he wants kind of two kinds of mandates and kind of authority to go back. He wants a political authority, so he needs that from the Spanish king, queen, which he gets. But the one that's often been overlooked, and just I think that I'm trying to kind of hold front and center here, is that he actually needs a moral and religious authority for what he is up to and about to embark on. And so who does he look to get this authority? He looks to, at that time, the Western Christian Church was united there were kind of two varieties of Christians in the 15th century. There was only the Eastern Orthodox. They'd split East and West, but in the West there was the Pope in Rome, and the entire Western church was organized under the Pope in Rome. So that's who he appeals to. So unless any of you Protestants in here start getting ready to wag your fingers, this is before the Protestant Catholic split, right? It's before the split with the Church of England and the Catholic Church. So all of Western Europe is kind of under the kind of Catholic umbrella at this moment. So he looks at the Pope in Rome, and there had been actually building over the 15th century these appeals. Columbus is actually not the first. The first comes in 1452. And so this one that Columbus appeals to is building on a theological case for how Western Christian European nations are to deal with the rest of the world, and what Christianity has to say as a moral mandate for that. And over time, the way these documents that became known as the Doctrine of Discovery. And this is something, Frank, so I've got a PhD in religion, studied a lot of religious history. I think I might have heard that term somewhere along the way, but I definitely did not peg it as something to pay attention to. And sort of in the book, I talk about it as I've come to see it as a kind of Rosetta Stone for decoding the way that the moral compass of Europeans was set as they were setting their actual compasses, right, to come here and land on these shores en masse. But the logic of it that comes to be built up over between 1452 and 1493 is basically this. Through a lot of kind of flowery theological language and very sophisticated theology, but it boils down to this: if you encounter people in other lands who are not Christian, and that is the key, if they are not Christian, that is the primary designation about whether they have human rights or not. If they are not Christian, you have the right, in the name of the king and the church, to go in and to occupy their land, steal their goods, and then there are kill them if need be, do it by force. And then there are these words written into these documents from the hand of the Pope, the leader of the Western Christian Church, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery.
I just wanted to let that sink in a little bit? Because I'm not really fucking sure that anybody knows or anybody realizes the depths. You've heard me say time and time again, I don't care what you believe. I don't care what your faiths are. I care what you believe because your beliefs are rather possibly going to translate into actions. And God damn it, if it wasn't for the fact that the Christian church, in its proclamations, the Pope in Rome, and, let's remember, we're talking about a time when the divine right of kings was a principle of Western thought, enlightened Western thought, or maybe not so enlightened Western thought, mostly egotistical assholes that happen to hold power or aspire to power. Remind you of anything? People that are saying, I'm doing this with God on my side. Remind you of anything? Remind you of people standing in front of churches saying, we're going to put down this demand for people's civil rights with God on our side? Remind you of anything? Let me remind you that Alexander VI papal bull basically saying, enshrining this bullshit into what became international and later on U.S. law, invoked this doctrine. I mean, let's go back a little bit further in history. And this is kind of off the top of my head kind of stuff. Cause I did, my historical background goes a little bit further back into like the 1300s to 1200s and I studied granted bachelor's degree 50 years ago. What the hell, it's like I'm not current on any of this stuff, but I happen to recall that a fellow by the name of Marco Polo took a little trip in the 1200s 1300s out to Cathay, I think the Europeans called it at the time, at China, basically. What did he come back with? Gunpowder and macaroni. Why didn't the Europeans have this attitude at that point in time? Maybe it's because the Chinese had gunpowder. And people in Europe will say that Europeans will say, "Oh yeah, well they had gunpowder, but all they used it for was for fireworks." Isn't it like no? They knew what the shit could do. They blew shit up with it. It's like everybody does. It's like, you got gunpowder? Hey, let's blow shit up. Let's be serious, people. It takes a certain degree of incredible hubris to basically say, well, it's there, they're there, they can't fight us. It's what's the term? There is a term for it. Terra nullis, I think they called it, uninhabited land. And what they meant was uninhabited by Christians, uninhabited by Well, in the Pope's view, Roman Catholics, I mean, after all, look at what the Pope in Rome did to the Pope in Byzantium. It's like, well, we're on this crusade. We're going to take over the Holy Land. Oh, you don't mind if we stop by and and go through your town first, right? I was like, it's yes, Christian nationalism has deep roots, deep roots. Christian brutality has deep roots, deep roots. And Christian love is usually set aside. Few and far between are the victories of those who follow the gospel of brotherhood. They exist, but they're the victories, the political victories of those that follow the teachings of the Beatitudes are few and far between. Gosh darn it.
Right, so that's in the documents, right? That are there. If you want to go look at them, like there's actually a website called doctrineofdiscovery.org, and they're there in their original Latin. They're there in English. You can actually see them. They're really quite astonishing. But Columbus actually returns then to the New World, not only armed with ships, soldiers, and missionaries, but with this divine moral mandate. Right? And it's really based on this idea of the superiority of European civilization and Christianity. Like that is the key to the entire thing that sets it all in motion. So I talk about that at the beginning of the book. And one of the things I think it helps us do is to think about some of the conundrums, the visceral kind of arguments we're having today. We can still see the roots of them or the seeds of them in this conflict and in this kind of religion that enters the world. So, today we're still having a debate over, again, back to this question, like, are we a divinely ordained promised land for European Christians? Is that who America is? Is that who America is for? Or are we a pluralistic democracy where everyone, regardless of race, regardless of religion, stands on equal footing before the law? And we see this in the book. I kind of trace it out. You can see this haunting us and following us all through our history. The Declaration of Independence, right, which we think of, and rightly so, as having these beautiful principles, right, of inalienable rights and all of that. But that same document refers to the original inhabitants of this land as merciless savages. Right, so it has that still that idea of kind of Christian and European superiority built into it. And one of the complaints between the colonists to the British Crown are actually that he is alleging that he is supporting slave rebellions. Right, that's a complaint about the colonists, and also one of the points of contention was the colonists wanted to expand westward, and the British Crown, was like, no. We've drawn up separate agreements with the Native Americans, and we're reserving our rights to those lands. You can't have them. So
Just a second. Let me just get myself back on here. I mean, here's the thing. This is the history that people don't want taught. And this is the history that is true. This is the history that is true. This man was born in Jackson, Mississippi. This man is the man I want speaking to folks in Jackson, Mississippi right now. And he was. This man is doing the work. In another talk he gave at Politics and Prose, I think it was, or maybe no, it wasn't. It was a small bookstore somewhere in Mississippi. Somebody asked a question, and I don't know. Maybe he'll make reference to this as well. That Christian pastors, when it comes around to Martin Luther King Day or something like this, will quote forever from the I Have a Dream speech, but they won't quote from the letter from the Birmingham jail. They won't quote or read that letter. And that letter was a letter of radical acceptance, radical change that needs to happen in people's hearts and minds in order for us to move beyond a declaration from political and economic interests on the part of Pope Alexander VI in the fucking 15th century to a point where we're dealing with facts on the ground and people on the ground and conditions on the ground today. Not that the same conditions didn't exist in the 15th century, but 15th century thinking is what we're encountering. You know, we're encountering the same kind of thinking in 2023 as was propounded in 1493. And there is no fucking reason and no fucking excuse for us to tolerate that, no matter what your religion is. People don't deserve to get shoved into categories and basically said, well, you don't say basically into situations where, oh, if you don't agree with me, then you don't deserve to exist. You deserve to be re-educated. I mean, we get the right wing talking about Chairman Mao's re-education camps. Well, what is this? I mean, thank you, Pragmatic Crystal, for posting that link, because it's very important. It's a very, very important document. People need to understand the radicalism that Dr. King brought. The radical side of doctrines founded in Christian belief that goes completely contrary to the hate that is preached by Greg Locke, by Matt Walsh, by all of these douchebags. I can't fucking believe that I made it this long into a stream of mine without using foul language. But there you go. Let me see. Let me pop this other stuff up here again. It's like, yeah, well, let me put myself in the corner and get this guy going again. So yeah, let's just do it. I know I'm getting close to stepping on my stream, and I don't want to do that. But
so that was kind of part of it's built into even that document. It's built into the Constitution in ways there as well. It gets incorporated into U.S. law. There's a case called Johnson v. McIntosh in the early 1800s that explicitly draws on this doctrine of discovery logic.
I mean, I couldn't believe
and
this
just
guy was
lays
pulling
it
up
out there.
thing
It just
after
says
thing
it-
after
it-
thing.
it
This guy
says the
fucking is
superior
great.
genius of Europe, right, and the superiority of Christian religion were reason enough to deny land rights to indigenous people here in the country. So it stays with us all the way through. So what I'm trying to do is to have this big arc, but then I'm also looking at ways that this plays out on the ground in the book. And so I have 3 chapters. I went to 3 different places in the country, 3 chapters on each. One of them you will be interested to know is the Mississippi Delta. So I spent some time up there hanging out with the folks that have been working on developing the Emmett Till Memorial work in Tallahatchie County and in neighboring counties in the Delta. Which, by the way, most of you've seen it, but I was just at the reception at the Department of Interior after the signing of the proclamation that there's going to be a new national monument, the Emmett Till and Maybe Till Mobley National Monument, that'll be under the auspices of the National Park Service. So that's the result of 20 years of work, a little more than that actually, by local citizens in Tallahatchie County deciding to tell that story. But I guess the sort of guiding light of the book is, I think sometimes we hear stories like the Emmett Till story, the reaction is often so awful. And you hear adjectives like unimaginable, incomprehensible, right? That kind of violence could be wielded, right? And one of the things that I think telling this longer story about this deep struggle that we've had with divinely ordained racial violence in this country is that those kinds of stories become less mysterious, right? We start to understand, oh, well, we've got this root that comes with us here. And so in the story, I start the chapters on Mississippi and try to weave together the story of indigenous people and the story of enslaved Africans in each place, right? So there's a line at the beginning of the book on the chapter on Mississippi where I say, Emmett Till was born in 1941, but his story begins 400 years earlier with the arrival of Hernando de Soto in 1541, right? And to really understand that trajectory, we've got to understand what happens there. I'm going to stay with that one for just a moment because it's a Mississippi story.
You fucking well do. It's
but
this.
In the Capitol
Oh,
Rotunda today in Washington, D.C., there are 4 gigantic 8 by 12 foot paintings around the rotunda and the upper part there. If you've been there, you've seen them. And they are there because they explain key pivotal moments in the development of the nation, right? One of those moments is the arrival in 1541 of Hernando de Soto at the Mississippi, right? And this painting is quite extraordinary. I describe it in the book, and you can look it up online if you want to take a look at it. But I'll give you a brief description because it encapsulates this, and we're still holding it up as a key moment, right, in our historical development of the country. But what it depicts is, if you just glance at it, the first thing you see is, of course, De Soto, right? He's on a magnificent white horse in his European finery. Clearly not what he was wearing to tromp around the wilderness at that time, but he has his European finery on. He's in the center. He's well lit in the painting, and behind
I fucked up in two ways. I fucked up in two ways. I took the screen share that was going on off, and God, I'm such a bad producer. I need a producer. Find me a producer. God damn it. All right. So hopefully we can get back to the hopefully we can get back to the
just kind of
thing
loose
here.
on the ground across the bottom. And if you follow it to the right, sweeping up the bottom right hand side of this part of the painting is 3 or 4 men there who are pushing up this 20-foot crucifix, right, in the other corner of the painting. And in one of them reading, it's a little priest at the bottom reading a religious proclamation as they're pushing this up in the village, right there in the middle of the village. And I think we've all seen those kind of paintings before. You've seen the people planting their flag and planting the crucifix. But I think when we kind of read this in the light of the doctrine of discovery, what we realize is that those were not, I think I always thought when I saw those paintings, okay, these guys are like giving thanks to God for a safe voyage, or something like they're having a little worship service there to kind of be thankful. But they are making a legal claim to the land by erecting that cross. Like that's part of the ritual of international law at the time, directed by the doctrine of discovery. So this is it's a ritual enactment of a legal claim that they are making. And again, based on this idea of the superiority of Christianity, the superiority of European civilization. And that is in our capital. It's one of only 4 paintings telling the story of who we are, in the U.S. Capitol today. So it's still with us in so many ways. The other words that we'll often hear, right, that I'm sure my son will be writing essays on what this means: manifest destiny, right? A new Zion, right? Borrowing Christian language, right? Even a city set on a hill, right? From Winthrop. Comes from Winthrop was no pal to the indigenous people around him, right? And this city set on a hill was not a benign example or beacon, right? I mean, it was a fort, right? And it was a place from which violence came to those around him. So in the book, I tell the story of Emmett Till, and behind that, the story of the Trail of Tears, right? And really understanding that. And what I think happens is when you do that is, the way I put it, is that we begin to see a common thread behind those things. I always learn, well, first of all, I should say, I learned almost nothing about indigenous history in my classwork anywhere through a PhD program, public school here, just virtually nothing there. But even when we do learn, I think most of us kind of, particularly if you look like me, have background like me, there is kind of African-American history over here. We can name a few people. You can name probably Martin Luther King. That may be about it. And there are almost nothing, right? Just arrowheads, right? Something like that. It's archaeology, but there's nothing about the living history of indigenous people that we ever learned there. I should also say this, like even African-American history. And I was in public school in the 80s, so we were starting to celebrate Martin Luther King Day here, but it was still, in this state, celebrated along with Robert E. Lee Day, Robert E. Lee's birthday. And when I graduated from Forest Hill, I graduated at the top of my class. If you had asked me who Medgar Evers was, I could not have told you. And Medgar Evers was gunned down 9 miles from my driveway growing up, right? And
it blows my mind, absolutely blows my mind that is true. I don't care what you call it. I don't care what you call it. You want to call it critical race theory? You don't need that. Tell the fucking truth. The Lexington Battle Green was 1 mile from my home, and I knew that more than I knew. I suspect for most people in the greater Boston area during the desegregation of the Boston school system. I suspect that most people in the greater Boston area did not know what was going on unless you were tied in to say, as I was, a black church. I went to a church in Boston. It was a black church. Through a bunch of curious personal circumstances. But it's absolutely astonishing to me that this guy didn't know whom. It grew 4 miles away from where Medgar Evers and the other 4 were shot. He didn't know who this guy was and what they were doing and what it meant on the political landscape of the United States of America in the 1960s. It's unbelievable to me that is the case. And if it's the case for this man who clearly has studied and is, eyes open at this point in time, it's just fucking tragic how ignorant people are. Tragic. Just it's like, let's go roll the goddamn tape.
And who was he gunned down? He was gunned down by an Episcopalian, right? A white Episcopalian from the Delta, who was a member in good standing at Church of the Nativity in the Delta, and who had written multiple op-eds to Cleveland papers and other places saying that if any African-American came to his church, he'd be waiting there with a gun. And what was Medgar Evers doing? I think it's part of the story always gets lost. What was he doing right before he was killed? He was trying to integrate First Baptist Church and Galloway Memorial Methodist Church. That was the work that he was doing. And that's what cost him his life, ultimately. Right? So the stories are like very, very near to us. I knew almost nothing about the Trail of Tears. And I went to Mississippi College, right? My friend Steven's here, who's still on faculty there, and who we played soccer, go Choctaws, right? But despite the name, and it was on our jerseys and stuff, I knew nothing about the actual Choctaw people in this place. And there was a kind of little part of me that kind of wandered around the state looking, and I would see like, man, why is everything here built up in 1840, right? Or 1830 something? The country was around a long time before that. Like, why here is it 1830s, 1840s? And, it took us that long to sort of move off all the Choctaw Creek, Chickasaw folks from here in order to kind of build all the white institutions here. And linking this idea, right, that even in the Delta, all that fertile farmland up there, it was woods, right? It wasn't farmland, it was woods, like really impenetrable woods. And so what had to happen was first a removal of the indigenous people, and then the importation of African enslaved labor to clear that land, right? So it's kind of but if we kind of see these two things in focus, I think it takes us, in many, I'll kind of put it this way, many, I think even kind of more liberal, kind of do-gooder white people, in the earlier part of the 20th century would talk about, we got to address the Negro problem. We have to address the Indian problem, right? That was the language that was being used. And, but when we tell these stories, I think in more like stereoscopic vision, we can see these two narratives together. One of the things I'm arguing is that, like, look, if we are honest about it, what we'll see is that sort of if we push past the quote unquote Negro problem, and we push past the quote unquote Indian problem, what we see upstream from that is a white Christian problem, right? That we're still wrestling with, and we're still denying, I think, in many ways, that history. And so I think part of what I'm trying to do is in every place I'm looking at, and I could have written 50 every state, right, could tell these stories here. And so I went to Mississippi, to Oklahoma, to talk to the folks that were working on the Tulsa Race Massacre Memorial and commemorative work there that happened in 1921, based on one of the worst acts, maybe the worst act of mass racial violence that happened in 1921, where 300, maybe upward of that, that's a kind of probably a conservative estimate, African Americans were killed over a couple of days by roving bands of their white neighbors. Right. Then I went to Duluth, Minnesota, because I wanted to not just pick on the South and not just pick on a very conservative state. I think Oklahoma may be the reddest state. I think it's the only state that every county voted for President Trump in the last election in Oklahoma. But I wanted to go up north, right? Because what it became so clear to me is that this is not a Southern story, right? It's not a sort of like Western frontier story. It is an American story, right? So in Duluth, Minnesota, just a quick note there, and then we can maybe move some questions in a minute. There was a lynching in Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth touches the Great Lakes. I mean, it is right up there by Canada. Very white, very few African Americans lived there at the time or even today. And there were 3 African American men who were in town for a single day.
So just a brief interlude here, just to say, it's like, I'm not sure when this happened. I think it was long before my time, but this was a common narrative in the North during the civil rights struggle, that, oh well, all this stuff, all this bad shit's happening in the South, and it was like there was de jure segregation in the South. There was de facto segregation in the North. The prejudice was widespread. It was nationwide, absolutely nationwide. And these were the struggles that were going on in the 60s, going on throughout my life, and they're still going on. It's not a question of regionality. It's a question of coming to terms and coming to a reckoning with as Dr. Jones points out, with the foundational notions of a mindset, not the world. Yeah, you could even say a worldview, I guess. If your worldview encompasses the notion that some people are privileged and some people are unprivileged, some people are by right excluded from salvation in Christian terms, or humanity in atheist terms. I mean, I know I have personally actually encountered atheists that believe that I'm, not, I shouldn't be accorded the rights and dignities and privileges that they are accorded to from day to day. We need to get over this stuff. We need to that's like, it's not, oh well, these people over here, they're terrible people, but we've got your back. It's like, well, if you don't have the back of the people that are struggling, and you can't see the struggles of the people who are your neighbors, then I'm not sure you do. I'm really, honestly, not sure you do. I don't care if you're an Episcopalian, a Lutheran, an atheist, a Jain, a Hindu, or whatever. I'm not sure you understand the struggles that are going on today in this time, because you consistently blind yourselves to the struggles that went on in the past. You consistently blind yourselves. You actually want to stop the teaching of the history of the people that caused these systems to be in the first place. This is why we have people trying to burn books or exclude books from the eyes of children. This is why. And long before the 1930s, a German writer wrote, "Those who would burn books will eventually burn people." I've got so much admiration for what this man is doing right now. A son of Mississippi, speaking to an historical society in Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi, right now, in September of this year. I've got tremendous admiration for what he is doing. A man with a divinity degree. Recognizing that we need to be speaking of these things. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying not to pull the bullshit. Trying not to play with counting the number of people in the chorus line ready to get on top of a pin and dance for the Lord. Gosh.
They were there working on a traveling circus that went through town. It was there for a single day. They were falsely accused by a white woman of sexually assaulting her. Right, the formula, right, for lynching in this country, and they were taken to jail. And in Duluth, Minnesota, 10,000 people, a mob of 10,000 people, pulled them from the jail and lynched them on the town square. Right, and that was 1/10 of the population of the town at the time. Right, so it was only about 100,000 people there, and then promptly, like, no one was brought to justice. The town's just like, we're not going to talk about this anymore. They were buried in unmarked graves, like just kind of covered up, hush it up. And about in the 90s, there was a group of 3 people that decided, like, we really are going to have to tell the truth about this, and we're going to have to kind of bring it to light. If we're ever going to have a more honest place to stand to build a better future together, we have to tell the truth about this and begin doing the work there. So what the book is doing is kind of looking at these efforts of truth-telling, confession, reconciliation, repair. I think for models, because we need some models for this, and so Mississippi, Minnesota, and Oklahoma are kind of places that I'm going to kind of look at this. Because we're here at a history museum, I want to end with one more reading here that goes to a particular problem that I know Mississippi, like many other states, has this struggle with things like banning books, things like not teaching parts of our history, all right, because it's going to make some people who look like me feel uncomfortable, right? How do we deal with that? How do we wrestle with that? And one of the things I'm calling for in the book, I think particularly for people who are white and Christian, because we have been at the heart of the problem, all right, is to step up and think about it differently. And one of the ways that I've tried to do that is I tried to kind of channel what it is I think we white Christians are really saying when we're trying to deny that history. Like, what are we really saying there? Because I think if we say it out loud, it becomes harder to defend, right? So I'm going to kind of give you my best example, my best attempt here that I kind of write in the last chapter of kind of what I think we white Christians are really saying. It's in a section of the book that's toward the end called Confession and Call, a word to my fellow white Christians. So I'll kind of.
Yeah. And this is where it's like what this guy's doing right now, what he's about to do right now is lay out the bullshit. Lay out the bullshit cushion that you're going to recline on. And yeah, what he's about to say is pretty much, it's laid out satirically, but it's laid out truthfully. This is what you have to believe. This is what you're actually asserting. This is what you're saying. When you say, we shouldn't teach the truth about our history because it makes us feel bad. Love this guy. Absolutely love this guy. This fucking guy. He's terrific. And I know this stream probably won't get many likes because it's far more popular to put some asshole up on screen and tear him down because it makes you look smart. I don't look very smart talking, that side commenting on what this man's saying. But I want to platform the good stuff, not the bullshit. And this is, I will do. Maybe. I have done. Maybe. But not as how asshole. Jeez. Look at people. Everybody's a fucking critic. Anyway, back to the thing here. I'm just like fucking this up.
Wrap with that. So the following is my attempt to give voice to the half-conscious narrative I inherited and relied upon for far too many years to dispel the ghosts of other American histories haunting the edges of my awareness. I believe it's not too far off the mark from the history many contemporary white Christians are demanding at this moment, or at least the history we actually want to claim.
Fucking well is.
If we cannot bring ourselves to assert it as straightforwardly as our forebears. We would like to hold these truths self-evident. No responsibility for the actions of our ancestors, nor for the effects of their actions on the present. That hard work and individual merit are the keys to understanding both the path to the present and the possibilities of the future. The haves and the have-nots of today receive what they deserve based on the virtues of their individual past actions. It follows that no one, particularly hardworking white Christian people, should be made to feel uncomfortable because of what we now have. If anyone asserts otherwise, we are the ones being discriminated against. This land is our land, from California to the New York Island. We deserve to keep everything we've worked so hard to take. We have deeds and safe deposit boxes with our names on them, the veracity of which are guaranteed by a notary seal and a state we created for this purpose. As for the vast amount of wealth locked away in individual trusts and institutional endowments, we have histories that document our industriousness to our now long and testify to our now long held legal ownership. Furthermore, what we have done with the ultimate authority. Jesus is one of us. In case there was any doubt, we made a likeness of Jesus in our image, the most widely distributed portrait in human history. We insist, both for ourselves and for others, on an inevitable present, one in which what was leads to what is, and what is will always be. It is not that we're against history. Now, we know the importance of a good origin story. History done rightly explains how we got here, with our fences transforming land into property, our ledgers turning labor and crops into capital, and our hands holding the receipts. The history of America, founded in 1776, is a Genesis story justifying the divinely ordained now, not a sloppy mess of narratives with multiple beginnings and contingent outcomes. Those who look like us own the publishing companies who hired our writers to tell the story of how we became to be America. Those executives also had the right connections to sell those packaged narratives to our public school boards, who handed books and lesson plans to our teachers, who in turn faithfully taught those stories to our children, and the circle remained unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by. We know that slavery was a blemish on this country's record, and that this was mostly the cause of the Civil War. Still, there were good and noble people on both sides. Even though slavery wasn't always as brutal as Hollywood depicts it, we're glad that sinful practice has ended and that the whole unfortunate affair is now behind us. What we didn't get right after the Civil War was finally rectified by the good Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whose eloquent words we now read in our churches and whose birthday we celebrate alongside Robert E. Lee's. On the occasion when we think about it, we also feel bad about what happened to the Indians. But we also share Laura Ingalls Wilder's sentiments about the land in the early days of the country. Quote, "There were no people there. Only Indians lived there." End quote. In any case, we weren't personally a part of all that. And it was, after all, our missionaries who brought the Indians with their primitive and savage ways out of the darkness and into the light of Christian salvation. It was our government and our churches that coaxed those lost children out of the woods and into boarding schools, saving their souls and disciplining their bodies for more industrious pursuits like farming and factory work. We still honor their history with our athletic team names, mascots, and more recently, with the occasional land acknowledgement at ritual at public events. We did finally give the Indians reservations of their own. They seem to be doing fine now with their casinos and government-provided health care. Finally, though of course there have been times when some Christians acted badly, they were acting against and not with the spirit of our faith. No true Christian would kill or steal or lie. This is the history we want our tax dollars to teach public school children. And many of our children are already getting this history in private Christian academies. We want our children to know that America is good, just like us. So I'm going to read just kind of one more little passage here at the very end. It's kind of my little benediction. We white Christians no longer represent the majority of Americans. We are no longer capable of setting the nation's course by sheer cultural and political dominance. But there are still more than enough of us to decisively derail the future of democracy in America. If we wish to do otherwise, we can no longer disingenuously pretend that democracy and the doctrine of discovery are or ever were compatible. We can no longer pay tribute to one while benefiting from the other. We must choose. And if we choose democracy, it will require more than just confession by an unflinching few. It will require joining the work already underway to repair the damage done by this malignant cultural legacy. Through that transformative engagement, we might finally illuminate the path that leads to a shared American future. Stop there. All right. So I think we got, yes, a microphone over here, which
I am muted. I'm going to stop it there. The comments are terrific. The comments that follow on in this video, which is linked in the description, are really great. The Q&A is pretty cool. But what I what I want to impress upon people is that what this guy's calling for is a truth and reconciliation, way of moving forward. If we don't do that, we're fucked. We're fucked. We need to acknowledge the importance of the mindset that says white Christian Europeans have the duty to Christianize the earth, to spread our particular cultural influence throughout the nations. We need to acknowledge that that has always redounded to our economic benefit. And that economic benefit has been on the backs of people who we oppress. We need to recognize. I commend you to Cynthia McDonald's take on reparations. You can find that by a simple Google search, Cynthia McDonald reparations. We need to be cognizant of the intellectual foundations that we teach our children. That they're better than, rather than teaching the truth. That guns and germs and steel were key part of European dominance over the world in the years from the age of exploration in until now. We need to look at history. We need to look at what we need to look at Pope Alexander VI papal bull. We need to look at all of those documents and realize that humans, European humans, came up with a pile of crap to justify their colonialist expansion over the face of the globe, and that we're living through the legacy of that, and that the legacy of that has, in great substance, an implicit diminution of human rights and human dignity for everyone on the planet. We need to be better. And we need to know that that philosophical foundations with, at this point, 500 years of inculcation into the zeitgeist, particularly of people of European descent, needs examination and correction. Not just in the United States, but everywhere. The history of racism, the history of exclusion probably has a longer history. But when we combine the philosophies of exclusion to those of the legitimacy of a nation state, it's poisonous. And in a world of 8.3 billion people, it's untenable going forward. We need to change. There have been people throughout history that have recognized that. Those voices have often been quelled and sent to the background, and they need to be in the foreground. And in the meanwhile, we need to laugh a lot. So let's go over and laugh on Bad Science Sunday. And I got to find myself a link so I can throw that link in the chat for everybody. We can go over and raid Maya's stream, which I'm sure is going great guns right now. Let's see. I think I can probably find it real quick here. 26 minutes in or something like that. So let me just sort of let's see, share this link. I wish I could do a formal, like when I close the stream, do that thing, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. And I really don't know if I can even do that yet. But there we go. All right, so I did that. And then I'll go and go. Oh, yeah, okay, I can do it right here because it's like right here in the thing here. Ba-boom. All right, the Bad Science Sunday. Let's go. That's the link to my stream, and that's going on right now. And I want to thank all of you for coming by and listening to my blathering on a little bit about this, but this is stuff I feel so passionate about and have for years and years. What I got coming up is on Thursday at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, which would be let me think, 6 and 5 is 11, so that'd be 1100 UTC. And you can do your offsets any way you like. Is that 70 show? I'm gonna be 70 on Thursday, which is fucking frightening. It's like yeah, Simon and Garfunkel showing my age. Can you imagine us years from today? Sharing a park bench quietly. How terribly strange to be 70. Oh, friends. Yeah. So I've got some folks maybe showing up. Maybe Dr. Ben will show up if he finds some time. Neil the 604 Atheist might pop in. A couple other folks that have hopefully will be there. My friend Jen, I got cookies, says she'd be there. It's like, you know, I'm reaching out, trying to get some folks who might jump in on the thing and help me be foolishly 70. Like my mom said to me when she was 58 and I was 18. After I asked her, it was like, what's it like to be 58? And she, with some reflection, looks at me and says, you know, I look in the mirror and I see an 18-year-old girl. And me being 18, I looked at her and said, So do I. Which, given the dynamic at the time, was rather funny. Anyway, let's go have fun with Maya. Tell him Steph sent you. Bye.